very, very good to be here with you all. As you all know, Dad's on a mission trip right now in Mexico, and he's going to bring a lot of awesome stuff back, but I have something to share with you today, too. So, I'm actually calling my message today the worship perspective. Reason being, as you guys know, I get to lead worship here. I have the honor of doing that every single week, and as a worship leader, I spend a lot of time making sure that my heart is aligned with what the Bible says about worship. And in doing that, I've gained a few just insights over the years, and I want to share some of those thoughts with you today. First of all, I actually want to read Psalm 22, verse 3, and kind of explain to you why are we doing this. It says, "Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One, you are the one Israel praises." The translation I usually use actually says, you inhabit the praises of your people. And we want this to be a church where God's presence lives, right? He abides here, and we want him to inhabit our praises, and in order for that to happen, there need to be praises. And so I want to share a lot of just kind of my thoughts on that. So first of all, the first topic I kind of want to cover is motivation. We have a motivation to worship, and sometimes it is because of what God has done for us, which is great, right? You know, that's thankfulness, and, you know, we sing songs. I Thank God is a good example as a song of thankfulness. It comes from a place of our own personal experience with God the Father, and so we sing out of thankfulness when we sing that, and that's great. However, if your reason to worship is always about why you want to worship, then your motivation to worship is going to fall through the cracks on a day that you are sad, on a day that you are hurt, a day that you are angry, when you are confused and you don't understand God, you don't understand what he's doing, you don't understand why he's doing it. Your motivation to worship will fall through the cracks if your foundation is based on your mood. If your foundation is based on your mood, well, let me ask you this. Is God only worthy when you're in a good mood? Is God only worthy when you feel like worshiping him? Or instead, is he worthy of our praises in every single circumstance? God is worthy when we are hurt, when we are confused, even when we're upset with him, even when we don't understand God, when we're having a bad week, whatever it is, God is still going to be worthy of our praises. And I came across this mindset too, just like I said, as a worship leader, I need to be prepared to lead worship every single weekend for 4 services at least, right? And our weekend services cannot depend on my mood. Our weekend services cannot depend on how my relationship with God is going that week necessarily, right? Because wouldn't it be weird if you came to church and it's like, we canceled today, Todd's not feeling it, right? Todd's not up to it, he had a bad day, it's okay, we're just going to go ahead and cancel. Wait till next week when he's on good terms with God again. No, that's absolutely not how we do things, because our worship service cannot be reliant on whether or not I'm having a good time with God today. It needs to be reliant on God's everlasting goodness. Amen. It needs to be reliant on the fact that God is always good, that he is worthy of our praises regardless of our circumstance. Amen. Thank you. Let me read another verse for you. 1 Chronicles 25, verses 1 through 8. Another perspective that I want to share with you is, it comes from this chapter. Is actually the context here is that King David is leading the charge on creating the first worship team, sort of. It's really cool. So it says, David, together with the commanders of the army, set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun for the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals. Here is the list of the men who performed this service. Now, the following verses are one of those chapters where you just get names and names and names that you can't pronounce. But I want to get through it anyway because I'm making a point here. So from the sons of Asaph, we have a list of Asaph's sons. The sons of Asaph were under the supervision of Asaph, who prophesied under the king's supervision. As for Jeduthun from his sons, here's a list of his sons. 6 in all under the supervision of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied, using the harp in thanking and praising the Lord. As for Heman from his sons, so many sons, All these were sons of Heman, the king's seer. They were given him through the promises of God to exalt him. God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. Wow. All these men were under the supervision of their father for the music of the temple of the Lord, with cymbals, lyres, and harps for the ministry at the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the supervision of the king. Along with their relatives, all of them trained and skilled in music for the Lord, they numbered 288. Young and old alike, teacher as well as student, cast lots for their duties. So, David's created this worship team. It consists of 288 skilled players, all of whom were raised up from childhood and trained specifically for this task of worshiping God. And we have a great biblical example here of the way that worship was conducted here. And one of my biggest takeaways is this. This was not an accident. Right? Like I said, I get to lead worship here. There's about 18 people on the team total between worship and tech, and we get to lead worship, between the 3 services, maybe 2 to 3 hours every week. And I will tell you right now, that takes work. That takes some work. That takes a lot of time to organize all that and make it happen. And so King David here, this is no small feat for him. This is no small victory. This is a large victory. Decades upon decades were spent literally raising children up to adulthood to play these instruments and create a team of 288 skilled players to worship God all the time. All this was done because David and his team had a passion and a vision to worship God and to do so with greatness. So when we apply this to ourselves, we must realize, first of all, our best work is never done by accident. Our best work will always be in partnership with God. It will be done on purpose. Because achieving excellence in our worship and in our ministries demands that we are thoughtful of them, that we grow, that we team up with people and ministries, and even we need to be mindful of the legacy that we'll leave off our descendants, right? And again, I'm not speaking to just the musicians in the room, right? There's a couple of us here, but there's a lot of us here that maybe aren't musicians. And my point here is just, we're all called for worship, That doesn't necessarily mean everyone here needs to learn how to play the guitar. That means everyone here is going to be part of worship, right? Whether you are just learning to raise your voice, to lift your hands, to sing, dance, and shout with joy, or even in a ministry, right? Our ministries are our form of worship as well. If you're in part of a ministry with our church here, whatever you're doing there is your form of worship, right? And your best work will not be done by accident. Right. Your best work will not be done on your own. It will be in partnership with the Father. That's right. Amen. Yeah. All right. And then I have a third kind of thought with you. 2 Samuel chapter 6, we're going to read verses 15 to 21. So, the context here, King David, again, we're reading more about King David. He's a very good example of worship. He is, right now we're transporting the Ark of the Covenant into the city, and David is, leading the team that is doing that, and he's rejoicing. It says, while he and all Israel were bringing up the Ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. They're being real loud about it. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, which, by the way, is David's wife, she watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. This is a celebration. This is a party. They're having a great time. There's offerings, things to be had. And let's continue to read. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. They ended with a meal. It was fantastic. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today. going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. She is criticizing him because, he was dancing so joyfully that his clothes didn't really work out, and that's what we're talking about here. Let's finish it up. And so David has a response. He says, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord." Amen. So, David transports this ark into the city. He's rejoicing. It's a great time. His wife despises him for it. And here's the thing. This is his wife, right? This is someone whose opinion you probably care about a lot, right? Your spouse. However, David is unaffected by her opinion. And he has a rebuttal, and it comes with two major points that I want to point out here. First one, it was before the Lord. He immediately states the worthiness of God right here. He's like, no, you don't understand. This was before God. This is who I was doing this for. It wasn't for you. It wasn't for all the people watching. It wasn't for all the people of Israel. This was before God. Second, he makes a point. God chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people of Israel. David understands something awesome here, that God responds to zealous worship. God responds to that passionate pursuit of his presence. And in fact, he's making this point that he's just like, God chose me over your father and any of these people who could have ruled, but probably people who feel a lot more distinguished than I am right now, right? People who feel a lot more dignified than I am right now. However, God chose me, right? Because David understands something awesome. In fact, like I said earlier, David is celebrating and he's having a great week, right? Everything's going really, really well. And that's probably a good motivation for his worship. However, David is the same man who wrote Psalm 22, 1 through 3, the first verses we read. Can we jump back there, actually, to verse 1? The same man wrote this. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. I love that word, yet. You are enthroned as the Holy One. David's motivation is still in the right place because David is having the worst time of his life, right? He writes this and he is anguished. He is having a terrible time. I believe at this time he's on the run, right? And he is crying out and he's full of anguish. He's like, God, why have you forsaken me? Why won't you respond to me? I cry out day and night and I get nothing right now. However, God, you are worthy of the praises of Israel. Be enthroned on our praises, Lord. That is his cry. In fact, the theme for the rest of that chapter kind of goes the same way. He's like, you are still worthy. You are still worthy. And so David worships for the right reasons. He does so relentlessly. He does not care so much about his circumstances when he comes to worship God the Father. And like I said, God sees that. God responds with blessing. He responds with anointing. And he does also respond with a calling for greatness. And David, of course, gets to become King David over Israel because God sees David's heart for worship. And it is not based on just if he's having a good time or not. Likewise, when you are in passionate pursuit of God and his presence, God sees that. He honors it. Oh, he loves it. He rejoices in it. And he responds to it. Which is my third major point. God's response is a beautiful, wonderful, majestic thing. Because, like I said, it took David from the lowest pits of the earth that he ever could have been in to the king of Israel. And that is not the only story in the Bible where somebody went from the lowest pits of the earth to king of something, right? God has a habit of responding and blessing those who have a passion to worship him. And so those are my three kind of major points that I want to share with you today. Just to recap, our motivation is always going to be best found in his worthiness. Our motivation cannot be found in anything else because it will fall short if it depends on you, your relationship with him, your mood that day, how things are going in your life that week. Your motivation to worship him needs to be based in his worthiness. Second point, again, bring your best. Your best work is not done accidentally and is not done by yourself. It is done in partnership with the Father. It is done on purpose. Whether your worship is an instrument, it is a ministry, it is a calling over your family or your social circles, whatever it is, that can be your worship. That can be your sacrifice. That can be your offering. And then lastly, the story of God's response to David's worship in the ark, which, by the way, the ark, real quick, is another great example. One of my favorites. I don't want to touch it too much because I will go on all day, but it's another great example of the time that people partnered together and built something amazing. The Ark of the Covenant. There's 5 chapters straight just talking about the detail that went into building the ark, and it is a beautiful, beautiful story. And the very end of the story, after all that work, is just very simply God's presence entered the ark. God responded to that zeal, that passion for his presence, that passion to worship him. God responds it by filling the ark with his presence. And so this church here is our ark. We get to work on it. We get to build it up. We get to be zealous in our worship and be in passionate pursuit of his presence when we worship. And God will see that. God will love that. God will respond with filling this place with his presence. Thank you so much. That is all I have for you today. We're going to worship at the end, and you will be able to practice zealous worship. But first, a word from Marcy.